Hey guys, tonight we slip into a different sort of myth, one that feels less like thunderbolts and monster slaying, and more like sneaky gossip whispered through marble hallways. You're sitting in the high, echoing halls of Mount Olympus, where the gods chatter and squabble the way bored neighbours might, except these neighbours can hurl lightning when they're annoyed. The air smells faintly of ambrosia, that sweet nectar everyone claims to enjoy, though you suspect it probably tastes like lukewarm honey water. Zeus, the so-called father of gods and men, leans on his golden throne and pretends he's very serious about cosmic order, when in reality his eyes keep wandering down toward the mortal world, and you, poor listener, are trapped in this long myth with him. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry, it's only boredom that gets you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time it is in your part of the world. Share it in the comments, and I'll imagine your sleepy corner of the planet glowing faintly while this story drifts across the globe. Now, dim the lights, let quiet settle in, and ease yourself into the calm rhythm of tonight's story. You stand at the edge of Olympus's grand hall, watching gods argue over trivialities. Here are fumes at Zeus, again. Apollo polishes his lyre, checking his reflection in the strings, as if the fate of the sun depends on his cheekbones being properly aligned. Dionysus swirls a goblet and pretends he hasn't already had 6. And then there's Zeus, restless, tapping his fingers on the arm of his throne. He's got that look that everyone recognizes, the look of a king about to take a stroll down to earth and cause problems. It's important to understand the context here. Historically speaking, the Greeks imagined their gods not as distant, perfect beings, but as magnified versions of themselves, petty, flawed, emotional, but with more thunderbolts and better special effects. A mainstream scholar will tell you that this anthropomorphic tendency helped ancient Greeks feel close to their deities. And here's a strange little tidbit. The ancients also liked to think the gods enjoyed watching theatre as much as mortals did, sitting invisibly in the crowd during tragedies and probably whispering spoilers. Back to Zeus. His reputation precedes him. By this point in myth, you know the routine. Zeus sees a mortal woman, Hera gets suspicious, and chaos follows. Some historians still argue whether stories like these reflect genuine religious belief, or if they were more like bedtime morality plays, warning listeners about the dangers of desire and power. Either way, tonight's focus is a story that even by Greek standards is bizarre. Not a swan this time, not a bull, not an eagle, but something far less convenient for a costume party. A golden shower. Yes, that's what the poets wrote down, and yes, everyone since antiquity has chuckled uncomfortably. The whispers begin in Olympus as Zeus peers down toward the city of Argos. The gods roll their eyes. They've seen this before. Hermes mutters, "Here we go again," while Athena pretends not to notice, already making bets with Apollo about how badly this will end. The earth below shimmers in the distance, and Zeus narrows his gaze on a lonely figure. Her name is Danaë, and though she doesn't know it yet, her life is about to get far more complicated than embroidery and chamber walls. Danaë, Princess of Argos, is locked away by her father in a bronze tower, or depending on the version, an underground chamber. Why? Because her father, Acrisius, received an oracle from Delphi telling him that his daughter's son would one day kill him. Parental overreaction at its finest. Instead of therapy or better parenting, Acrisius decides the logical move is to lock his daughter in solitary confinement. You can imagine the awkward family dinners. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect real practices of secluding royal women, or if it's purely symbolic, a way of dramatizing the lengths rulers would go to try to dodge destiny. Meanwhile, Danaë sighs in her prison, tracing patterns on the bronze walls. She can hear faint footsteps above, maybe her father pacing nervously, maybe guards shifting at the door. Her only view of the outside world comes from a tiny opening high above her head, where a strip of sky glows faintly like a forgotten candle. And it is through this tiny crack, this forgotten architectural detail, that Zeus will eventually pour himself. But we're not there yet. You can almost picture Zeus leaning over Olympus's balcony, chin in hand, muttering to himself about how unfair it is to be the ruler of gods but still have to come up with disguises every time he wants to visit Earth. He considers his options: swan, overused; bull, too bulky; handsome mortal. Hera spots that one too quickly. So instead he dreams up something no one could predict. A glittering rain of gold cascading down silently, a light so mesmerizing it feels less like a storm and more like the kind of visual effect you'd see in a sleep app. You'll remember this image later, when your eyelids are too heavy to keep track of thunderbolts. As you drift further into the story, keep in mind that the ancients didn't necessarily expect you to take it literally. Gold rain wasn't just shiny precipitation. It symbolized wealth, fertility, divine favour, all things kings both craved and feared. Whether Danaë experienced a glowing miracle or simply the suffocating weight of destiny depends on who's telling the tale. Even now, scholars still argue whether this myth is really about divine romance, patriarchal control, or just a poetic excuse for Perseus to exist. The gods around Zeus groan as they see the plan forming. Hera shakes her head, muttering something about divorce lawyers not existing yet. You, meanwhile, settle deeper into the rhythm of their bickering, feeling the words flow slower, softer, almost like rain beginning to tap against a rooftop. The scene is set. Zeus has spotted his target. A prophecy waits to unfold, and you, dear listener, are already halfway sunk into drowsiness, following the sound of marble footsteps, echoing voices and the faint shimmer of gold in the distance. You follow Zeus's gaze downward, toward the kingdom of Argos, where King Acrisius sits uneasily on his stone throne. He's not a confident ruler at this moment. No, he's fidgeting, wringing his hands, replaying in his mind the words of the oracle that still sting in his ears. Your daughter will bear a son who will kill you. It's the kind of prophecy that leaves no room for cheerful interpretation. Maybe the oracle meant metaphorically. Maybe the killing would be symbolic. Maybe it wouldn't happen at all. Historians still argue whether ancient audiences believed every prophecy was literal, or if they knew these stories were more flexible than stone. Either way, Acrisius heard only doom, and doom makes a man paranoid. So Acrisius does what only the most insecure dads in Greek mythology would think of. He locks Danaë away. But tonight, you don't stand with him in his paranoia. You drift gently past him, slipping down hallways and into the chamber where Danaë lives, or rather survives. She's beautiful, yes, but not in the painted, godlike way of Aphrodite. She's beautiful the way a lantern is in a dark cave, because she glows softly against despair. She spends her days combing her hair, humming half-forgotten tunes, and staring at a square of sky that never seems to change. You pause to notice the chamber itself. The poets say it was made of bronze, walls thick and gleaming, trapping her like a coin in a sealed jar. Bronze wasn't just symbolic. In the late Bronze Age, around the 12th century BCE, it was the material of war and power. Swords, armour, shields, all bronze. So the idea of a bronze chamber carried weight for ancient audiences. It meant wealth, protection, imprisonment, and a kind of cold metallic permanence. A quirky note, though. Archaeologists point out that building an entire subterranean bronze room would have been wildly impractical. It's more likely that storytellers just exaggerated the detail, hoping to impress listeners with something gleaming and claustrophobic. Danaë has no idea that the king of the gods has been staring down at her, like a child pressing his face to a toy shop window. She only hears faint noises above, footsteps, voices, wind moving through cracks. You can almost imagine her leaning her head against the wall, wishing for something new, anything new, even if it's dangerous. After all, the most dangerous thing at this point is boredom, and you can probably sympathise with that feeling as your eyelids get heavier. Zeus, however, is not bored. He is fascinated. From the lofty halls of Olympus, he's leaning forward like a gossip eager for the next chapter. He's seen mortals before, but something about Danaë's loneliness strikes him differently. Maybe it's her isolation that catches his attention, or maybe he's just looking for the next thrill. Historians still argue whether these myths were intended as metaphors for natural forces, Zeus as Skyfather fertilizing the earth, or whether they were just scandalous stories that audiences enjoyed repeating around the fire. Whatever the case, Zeus is hooked. You drift now into Danaë's private world. The chamber is silent except for the sound of her breathing and the occasional scrape of metal as she adjusts the chains on the door. She doesn't know it, but she's already being watched, not just by her father's guards, but by an immortal being above. Imagine the awkwardness if she did know. "Hello, my name's Zeus, I'm the ruler of Olympus, and I've been spying on you through a skylight." Not exactly a charming introduction. Outside her prison, the kingdom of Argos carries on with its routines. Farmers tend fields, priests make sacrifices, children play in courtyards. They have no idea that beneath their feet sits the princess of their land, a princess hidden like contraband, all because of one man's fear. A mainstream historical note here. Prophecies from Delphi were often deliberately vague, which let priests at the temple maintain authority no matter how events turned out. But Acrisius's interpretation is rigid, and in his rigidity he plants the seeds of his own downfall. Meanwhile, Zeus debates his approach. He has tried disguises before. As a swan, he swept Leda into a myth so confusing that artists later scratched their heads trying to paint it without upsetting church patrons. As a bull, he carried Europa across the sea to Crete, where she became the mother of kings. Each disguise was dramatic but also risky. Hera, ever suspicious, spotted those antics easily. So this time Zeus wants something different, something subtle. Though subtle is a word rarely applied to a glowing thunder god. You hover at his side as he brainstorms. He could appear as a mortal man, handsome and persuasive, but Acrisius's guards would never let him in. He could break open the chamber with a bolt of lightning, but that would announce his intentions to the entire kingdom. And then he imagines it. A golden shower, not rain as mortals know it, but a glittering cascade of a light, like thousands of coins tumbling gently through the sky. Rain is harmless, rain is inevitable. Rain seeps through cracks no guard can block. It's the perfect disguise, a combination of beauty and inevitability. And so Zeus makes his plan. You can almost hear the other gods groan. Hermes mutters, "Well, that's original," while Apollo rolls his eyes. Hera, of course, is already sharpening her questions, but Zeus is determined, and you, sleepy traveller, are swept along with him. The sky over Argos dims. Clouds roll slowly, thick and dark, but they shimmer faintly, as if lit from within. Danaë notices the shift in the light above her chamber. She tilts her head, watching that tiny square of sky grow brighter, stranger. The air feels charged, though not with the violence of thunder. Instead, it's warm, golden, almost comforting, like sunlight caught in liquid form. And there, just at the edge of perception, the first drop falls. Not water, not bronze, but pure gold. It glimmers as it slips through the crack, followed by another, then another, until the chamber fills with a cascade of light. Danaë gasps, shielding her eyes, as the rain of gold pours gently over her, turning the bronze walls into mirrors of fire. You linger in the chamber as this shimmering miracle unfolds. Whether Danaë understands what is happening is a question scholars still debate. Did she see a god in disguise? Did she feel divine presence? Or only wonder at the mystery? Whatever her thoughts, the scene is unforgettable. A lonely princess, a locked room, and a shower of gold that changes the course of myth forever. The gods above whisper, mortals below remain unaware, and Acrisius sleeps uneasily, not knowing that the prophecy he fears has just taken its first glittering step. You linger now inside the bronze chamber, where Danaë sits in stunned quiet after the rain of gold has passed. The glow has faded, leaving only the dull gleam of the bronze walls, and yet everything feels different. The silence is heavier, charged with something invisible. You can almost hear her heartbeat echoing against the metal, as though the chamber itself has been transformed into a drum. Outside, the world goes on unbothered. Traders shout in the agora, flocks of sheep jostle in the hills. But here in this sealed room, history has just shifted. Days pass. The rain of gold becomes memory, then a dream, then something Danaë can barely believe she witnessed, and then comes the change. A weight in her belly, a steady rhythm within her body, the undeniable sign that her solitude is no longer hers alone. You watch her, place her hand against her stomach with both terror and wonder. She whispers to herself, as if speaking might invite her father's wrath down through the walls. She knows what's happening, even if she doesn't fully understand how. Zeus has left her with a gift, or perhaps a burden, depending on how you frame it. Above, Acrisius continues his nervous routines, pacing the corridors of his palace. He has grown so accustomed to worrying about the prophecy that he barely pays attention to anything else. He believes his plan, locking Danaë away, has saved him. Historians still argue whether this story reflects a real cultural obsession with controlling royal women, or if it's simply a dramatic exaggeration of patriarchal fear. Either way, Acrisius is blind to the truth unravelling right beneath his feet. Danaë's chamber grows stifling. The walls, once symbols of security, now feel like threats. She hums lullabies to herself, lullabies she never thought she'd sing to anyone but her own shadow. You might think about how human this moment is. One of the great heroines of myth, caught between dread and tenderness, rocking herself to sleep against the clanging silence of bronze. A quirky note slips in here. Some versions of the myth suggest that Acrisius had women servants attend to Danaë, despite the imprisonment. If that's true, you can picture the whispered gossip in the dark, the gasps when they realised Danaë was pregnant. Perhaps they swore loyalty. Perhaps they whispered rumours through cracks in the palace walls. Even today, scholars still argue whether the myth was first meant as a tale of divine wonder or as a cautionary story about secrecy that can't be hidden forever. Time folds like cloth, and eventually Danaë gives birth. The sound of a baby crying fills the bronze chamber, echoing strangely against the walls, bouncing upward as if to alert the world. And for the first time, Acrisius hears the echo of something he cannot ignore. He descends, torch in hand, his steps metallic and final. You follow him into the chamber, the smoke of his torch painting the walls black and gold. There, in the centre, Danaë cradles a newborn child. Her face is pale but fierce, protective in the way only a mother can be. Acrisius's eyes widen, his fear confirmed in the worst possible way. He doesn't see his grandson. He sees the prophecy breathing in miniature, wrapped in cloth, wailing at fate. The king's mouth trembles as he demands answers, though Danaë only holds the child closer, rocking gently, whispering that nothing can touch him while she's alive. This is Perseus, not yet the hero with the wing sandals, not yet the slayer of Medusa, not yet the rescuer of Andromeda. Right now he's only a baby with tiny fists and a cry that could melt bronze, but he carries the shadow of destiny in his fragile body, a reminder that kings cannot outwit prophecy, no matter how many locks they build or chambers they forge. Acrisius reels back. You can almost feel the cold sweat running down his arms. He had believed bronze walls would protect him from fate, but fate has seeped through anyway, disguised as rain. He mutters to himself, "What have I done? What can I do?" His paranoia grows heavier, the kind that makes kings dangerous. He doesn't dare kill Danaë outright. After all, she is his daughter, and to shed kindred blood was a crime even kings feared. Besides, killing an infant might enrage the gods. So he schemes. And as he schemes, you watch Danaë rock her son gently, whispering lullabies that sound like resistance. The chamber feels less like a prison now and more like a cradle of destiny. Bronze walls still trap her, but they also reverberate with the heartbeat of a god-born child. Somewhere in the distance the sea murmurs against Argive shores, hinting at the journey waiting ahead. Let's pause here and notice the irony that always sneaks into Greek myths. By trying to avoid his fate, Acrisius has already set it in motion. If he had left Danaë free, perhaps events would have unfolded differently. But fear makes people foolish, and foolish kings are the backbone of half the legends you've ever heard. Scholars still debate whether the myth was originally told as political commentary, warning rulers against paranoia, or simply as a juicy tale to keep audiences hooked. Either way, you know the pattern. Destiny wins, mortals lose, and babies cry their way into the heart of history. So you sit with Danaë as the days pass, rocking beside her in the bronze glow, hearing the soft sighs of Perseus as he drifts to sleep. Above, Acrisius sharpens his plans, while Zeus looks down smugly, proud of another successful disguise, and you, weary listener, feel yourself swaying with the rhythm of the cradle, the quiet echo of prophecy, and the slow, steady ticking of fate's clock. You drift upward now, away from the cradle and the bronze walls, and find yourself back in the airy halls of Olympus, where Zeus is basking in his own cleverness. He leans back, smug, as if transforming into a rain shower with a height of creativity. Hermes claps slowly, sarcastically, while Apollo tunes his lyre to drown out the awkward silence. Hera, of course, is seething. She's seen this act before. Zeus disappears for a few hours, comes back glowing, and suddenly mortals are whispering about strange children born under mysterious circumstances. You can almost imagine her muttering, "A shower of gold." Really, couldn't even pick something subtle. But Zeus doesn't care. He paces like an artist who just unveiled a masterpiece, explaining his logic to anyone who'll listen. Rain slips through cracks, rain is harmless, rain is overlooked. And yet, for Danaë, it wasn't harmless at all. It carried the weight of destiny. Scholars still argue whether myths like this were intended to highlight the inevitability of divine will, or if they were simply metaphors for how unexpected change reshapes lives. Either way, Zeus is proud of himself, and you, sleepy listener, are stuck watching the god of thunder indulge in a little self-congratulation. You shift back down to Argos, where Acrisius is in turmoil. He doesn't know yet what to do with Danaë and her newborn. He walks the halls muttering, consulting advisors who give him nervous half-truths. Everyone knows the story of Oedipus, that trying to avoid prophecy often ensures its fulfillment, though in Acrisius's time that tale hadn't yet been written down. Still, the theme was already alive in Greek storytelling. Fate is slippery, and the more you clutch at it, the more it slides through your fingers like sand. In Danaë's chamber, the child Perseus grows stronger each day. His cries echo like trumpet blasts, and though he's only an infant, his presence feels larger than life. Danaë hums to him, telling stories she remembers from her youth, of rivers that spoke, of nymphs who danced, of kings who fell when they thought themselves untouchable. She doesn't know it yet, but she's already raising a hero, not with swords or training, but with the soft endurance of love. Meanwhile, Zeus muses on his success. He recalls his previous disguises, how he once transformed into a bull to carry Europa across the sea. That story left its mark on geography itself, with Europe said to bear her name. He remembers being a swan with leader, which later inspired countless poets and painters. Compared to those, his Rain of Gold trick feels almost minimalist, an avant-garde experiment in divine infiltration. Here's a quirky little thought. Some ancient storytellers suggested that Zeus's transformations weren't just disguises, but symbolic expressions of his power over natural forces. Bulls, swans, eagles, rain, each reflected a domain of his authority. Historians still argue whether audiences at the time understood these as metaphors or just enjoyed the drama of their favourite god dressing up like a cosmic trickster. Acrisius, however, is not entertained. He rants in his private chambers, cursing the gods for ignoring his precautions. He had trusted bronze walls, trusted silence, and yet here is his daughter with a divine child. His advisors warn him to tread carefully. Killing an infant born of Zeus could bring ruin. Stories abound of kings punished for less. Remember Pentheus, torn apart for mocking Dionysus. Acrisius doesn't want to join that list, so he thinks, and he schemes, and in his schemes you can feel the slow grinding of the gears of fate. You hover between father and daughter, sensing the tension tightening like a bowstring. Danaë clings to her son with quiet defiance, whispering that she will protect him no matter what. Acrisius sharpens his plans, staring at the sea as though it offers both solution and threat. And high above, Zeus stretches out on his throne, already losing interest, because gods rarely stick around to raise the children they scatter across the mortal world. One might pause here to consider the strangeness of these stories. How often Greek myths begin not with love but with fear, not with choice but with compulsion. Danaë did not choose her fate, Acrisius did not trust his daughter, and Zeus, well, Zeus never really asked. Yet out of this tangled knot emerges one of the greatest heroes of Greek tradition, Perseus, the slayer of Medusa. Scholars still argue whether these myths serve to justify power structures or subtly critique them. Perhaps both, depending on who was telling the story. The chamber grows heavier each day with secrets. Servants whisper, guards trade rumours, and somewhere in the dark Acrisius dreams of storms. The bronze walls, once a fortress, now feel like the drumbeats of doom, echoing louder as Perseus cries, louder as destiny creeps closer, and you, drifting in this myth, can almost hear the creak of the bowstring as fate draws back its arrow. Acrisius believes he still has time to act, but you know better. In Greek stories, every plan to outwit destiny only paints a bigger target on the planner's back. The night sky above Argos thickens with clouds, heavy and strange, like a canvas being painted in secret strokes. You drift with Zeus as he hovers above the kingdom, preparing for his chosen disguise. There's a restless sparkle in the air, the kind of shimmer you notice when you're half asleep and a streetlight flickers through the blinds. Below, Danaë sits with her infant, humming softly, unaware that the ceiling above her is about to dissolve into something otherworldly. Zeus closes his eyes and lets himself unravel. No thunderbolts, no blinding crash of power, just a slow, deliberate melting into brilliance. His form stretches into droplets, each one a bead of molten gold, each one humming with the weight of immortality. He doesn't fall so much as he drifts, a gentle cascade that slips through the cracks of the bronze chamber as though the metal itself were welcoming him. And suddenly the room is alive with light. It isn't the harsh glare of the sun, nor the cold flicker of firelight. It's something softer, warmer, as if the stars have decided to visit. Danaë gasps and rises, clutching her child, staring as the glittering drops gather around her, filling the air with tiny echoes of music. The bronze walls reflect the glow until it seems the entire room is a vessel of liquid gold. This image, of Zeus descending as a golden shower, is one of the strangest in Greek myth, and historians still argue how it was meant to be understood. Was it a poetic metaphor for sunlight piercing through a window? Was it a symbol of divine wealth pouring into a mortal's life? Or was it exactly what it sounds like? A magical, sparkling rainfall that dazzled listeners around the fire? The ambiguity is part of its power, and tonight you're caught in that shimmer, unable to look away. Danaë feels warmth against her skin, like the first touch of spring after a long winter. The drops don't sting. They glow and soothe, brushing her hair, her shoulders, her arms. The baby Perseus, still too young to comprehend, blinks and smiles at the brightness. You can almost hear Danaë whisper to herself, "Is this a dream, or a miracle, or something far more dangerous?" Here's a curious tidbit. In ancient cultures, gold wasn't just money. It was tied to immortality, incorruptibility, the very essence of the divine. Unlike iron, it doesn't rust. Unlike silver, it doesn't tarnish. To imagine Zeus becoming golden rain was to imagine the eternal flowing directly into the mortal world. The Greeks may not have had chemistry, but they understood symbolism, and they draped it heavily over this story like a glittering veil. Meanwhile, up on Olympus, the gods peek over the edge of the clouds. Hermes shakes his head, muttering, "He really went with rain this time." Apollo plucks at his lyre, trying to score the scene with something appropriately dramatic. Hera, arms crossed, fumes in silence. Even Athena allows herself a smirk at the absurdity. You can almost picture them as a dysfunctional celestial family watching the most awkward reality show in history. Danaë, though, doesn't laugh. She feels the presence of something greater filling her chamber, and it terrifies her as much as it awes her. She whispers to Perseus that they are not alone, that the walls around them have been breached by something even her father couldn't imagine. For a moment her loneliness is erased, not by freedom, not by escape, but by the strangest intimacy, light itself reaching down to hold her. The rain begins to pool at her feet, glowing like liquid treasure, until the whole chamber looks like a chest overflowing with coins. If Acrisius walked in now, he'd probably faint on the spot. But he doesn't know. The guards don't know. The world outside continues, blind to the miracle locked away in its centre. And you, floating in this myth, sway gently with the rhythm of the golden drops, as if they're meant to lull you deeper into stillness. This, after all, is what makes Greek myth so oddly comforting. They are both terrifying and beautiful, both absurd and profound. The image of a god dissolving into rain shouldn't make sense, and yet here it is, shimmering in front of you, impossible to forget. Scholars still debate whether the myth was originally meant as a fertility allegory, or if it was simply a dramatic flourish to highlight the inevitability of Perseus's birth. Whatever the case, it worked. The golden shower ensured that no chamber, no wall, no father's fear could prevent prophecy from finding its way. Danaë sinks to the floor, tears shining in her eyes as the glow finally fades. The chamber's quiet again, but no longer empty. She clutches Perseus, who stirs softly in her arms, and she knows, without knowing, that their lives have just been marked forever. Outside, Acrisius paces, convinced his plan is working. He thinks the bronze walls still hold destiny at bay. But you know better. Fate has slipped through, disguised as rain, shimmering and unstoppable. And in that knowledge, you let yourself drift further into drowsiness, the image of gold rain lingering behind your eyes. fading into the rhythm of your own slow breathing. The golden rain fades, and what's left is silence. Heavy, palpable silence that clings to Danaë like the bronze walls themselves. She sits cross-legged on the floor, the baby resting against her chest, her eyes wide as though she's been dreaming while awake. The glow is gone, but she still feels warmth in her skin, like sunlight lingering hours after sunset. The chamber seems altered too, though the walls are the same, cold, metallic, unyielding. Somehow, though, they feel less like prison and more like witness. Danaë looks at Perseus, who gurgles softly, unaware of the miracle he's been born into. She whispers questions that only echo back at her. What was that light? Who sent it? Am I blessed or cursed? For her there is awe, but also dread. To live in Greece in those days was to live among gods who loved you one moment and destroyed you the next. Historians still argue whether myths like these were meant to inspire reverence or caution, reminding mortals that divine encounters rarely ended without consequences. Danaë adjusts her son's blanket and rocks him gently. Her lullaby is little more than a hum, but it fills the chamber with softness. Imagine the acoustics of bronze, every note bouncing, every sound resonating. To Perseus it must sound like a symphony, his mother's voice multiplied 100 times by the strange metallic cradle around them. And in that echo, Danaë's fear begins to soften too. Perhaps the gods haven't forgotten her. Perhaps they've given her a gift she can't yet understand. Let's drift back for a moment to the bigger picture. In Greek myth, Zeus's encounters often left mortals bewildered. Remember Europa carried across the sea on the back of a bull, or Leda startled by a swan. Each tale mixes beauty with absurdity, and each ends in transformation. Here, with Danaë, the transformation is subtler. Her astonishment is not just about the event itself, but about what it means for her place in the world. Locked away, abandoned by her father, she's been noticed by the sky. Whether that's comforting or terrifying depends on how you interpret the smile of Zeus. And now, the whispers start. Servants notice something different in Danaë's posture. Guards overhear faint crying where none should be. Argos is a city like any other. Gossip spreads like wildfire. A quirky note from later storytelling traditions suggests that even the birds perched on palace rooftops chirped about Danaë's chamber, carrying the news into town. Whether that was poetic exaggeration or just another storyteller's flourish, you can imagine how small details gave rise to rumours that nothing could contain. Danaë tries to hide her astonishment from those who bring her food or clean the chamber, but she's not very good at secrecy. She glances at the ceiling too often, clutches Perseus too tightly, hums lullabies with too much intensity. You, drifting in the shadows, can almost hear the whispers escaping under the bronze door, slipping into the ears of guards who roll their eyes and mutter about divine nonsense. And then there is Acrisius. The king can sense when people are keeping things from him, and paranoia makes him sharp. He overhears the whispers, notes the unease of the servants, and his stomach twists. Could the prophecy have already begun to unravel? He storms the corridors, demanding answers, though none dare speak directly. Fear of him outweighs gossip, at least for now. Meanwhile, Danaë continues in her astonishment. The child is divine. She feels it in every cry. Perseus's little hands grasp at nothing, but she imagines he's reaching for the stars. She remembers old stories her nurses once told her about children born of gods, heroes who fought monsters, kings who founded cities. Was her son destined for such things, or destined to bring doom to her father, as the oracle foretold? Scholars still argue whether myths like this reflected an early attempt to explain the origins of heroic families, weaving divine ancestry into the roots of their fame. The chamber feels less oppressive now. The bronze no longer gleams with hostility. Instead, it glows faintly in Danaë's mind, forever touched by the rain of gold. She begins to decorate the space with little patterns scratched into the walls, stars, rivers, symbols she remembers from childhood. She sings more often. The astonishment doesn't fade, but it settles into something like acceptance. She has been chosen, in some way, for something greater. You pause here to consider the irony. Danaë, imprisoned to prevent destiny, has been given destiny's most precious gift. Acrisius thought he could stop time, but time has seeped in anyway. The astonishment in Danaë's eyes is not just about Zeus's golden disguise. It's about realizing that her life will no longer be small, no longer defined by a locked room. Even if she never leaves these walls, she has become part of a story that will echo for centuries. And as you watch her cradle Perseus, you feel that astonishment too. The quiet glow of fate seeps into your imagination, warm and unsettling at the same time. Your own thoughts drift like that golden rain, scattering softly through the silence until even astonishment feels like a lullaby pulling you deeper into sleep. The whispers reach Acrisius at last, carried not just by servants but by the uneasy hush that hangs over the palace corridors. A king can ignore many things: bad harvests, gossip about taxes, even the occasional priest with too much wine. But the sound of a baby crying in a place where no baby should exist is impossible to overlook. You drift alongside Acrisius as he storms down the staircase, torch in hand, his face pale and rigid. He has spent years convincing himself that his plan was flawless. Now he senses that something has slipped through, like water through his clenched fists. The bronze door screeches open, and light spills into Danaë's chamber. She jolts to her feet, clutching Perseus close. Acrisius freezes in the doorway, the torchlight casting his features into deep shadows. He sees her standing there, pale and defiant, the child swaddled in her arms. The chamber, once his symbol of control, now feels like a stage on which his worst nightmare is performing. For a moment, no one speaks. The crackle of the torch is the only sound, blending with the soft whimper of the infant. Acrisius's gaze narrows, flicking from Danaë's face to the tiny bundle she holds. He doesn't need to ask whose child this is, he knows. Prophecy doesn't need explanations, it needs only proof. Danaë breaks the silence, whispering that the child is a gift, that no mortal man came to her. She speaks of a light, a shower of gold, a warmth that filled her chamber. She tells her father she has been touched by the divine. You can almost hear the disbelief dripping from her voice, part plea, part prayer. But Acrisius hears only confirmation of the oracle's cruel words. This is the moment the myth tightens like a noose. Acrisius has choices. He could embrace his grandson, trust that love might alter destiny, or he could surrender to fear. And, as Greek myths so often remind us, fear makes kings foolish. Historians still argue whether these stories were designed to criticize rulers who clung to power at any cost. Acrisius, in this moment, becomes a living example of that paranoia. He steps back, trembling. To kill the child outright would risk divine wrath. Zeus might strike him down on the spot. Stories of mortals punished for harming God-born children are common. Remember Niobe, who mocked Aleto's children and watched her own turn to stone. Acrisius knows better than to tempt such fate, but he also cannot let the child remain. His mind scrambles for another plan, one that would allow him to avoid direct guilt while still escaping doom. Danaë begs him to understand, her voice echoing against the bronze. She swears she has done nothing wrong, that the gods themselves chose this path. But her words bounce off Acrisius like arrows against armour. He stares at her, a mixture of sorrow and terror in his eyes, then turns abruptly and leaves, the torchlight vanishing into the hall. The door slams shut again, and Danaë collapses, clutching Perseus tighter, knowing that whatever comes next will not be mercy. Above, the gods murmur. Zeus leans forward, his expression unreadable. Hera shakes her head, muttering about the endless trail of mortal messes her husband leaves behind. Athena frowns, sensing that this child will matter in ways no one can yet predict, and you, caught between divine and mortal, feel the tension rising like the tide. Here's an odd tidbit tucked away in some retellings. Acrisius supposedly considered burying the chest that would later hold Danaë and Perseus, hiding them in the earth instead of the sea. The sea won in most versions, perhaps because the Greeks saw it as the perfect stage for destiny. Vast, unpredictable, and always tied to the gods. Scholars still argue whether the sea was chosen as a symbol of danger or of purification, a place where fate is tested. Danaë doesn't know yet what her father will decide. She only knows that she has been caught, her secret revealed, and her child marked as dangerous before he can even speak. She rocks Perseus in her arms, whispering soothing nonsense, humming lullabies, trying to convince herself as much as him that things will be all right. But the chamber feels heavier now, the bronze colder, the shadows deeper, and you, sitting with her, feel the dread seeping into the walls. This is no longer a story of astonishment or miracle. It is a story of survival. The secret has been discovered, the prophecy has been reignited, and Acrisius is a man who will stop at nothing to outwit fate, even if it means abandoning his daughter and grandson to the mercy of the sea. You follow Acrisius as he storms back through the palace corridors, torchlight bouncing wildly off stone walls. His mind is racing faster than his footsteps. He has just seen his grandson, fragile, helpless, but heavy with prophecy, and all he can think of is the warning that has haunted him since Delphi. Your daughter's son will kill you. Kings don't often admit fear, but here he is, clutching it like a shield. In the silence of his chamber, Acrisius paces in circles, muttering to himself. He weighs his options like a merchant tallying coins. To kill the child would be simple, but dangerous. The gods have punished mortals for less. The legends float through his memory. Lycaon, who angered Zeus and was turned into a wolf. Pentheus, who mocked Dionysus and was torn apart by his own kin. Acrisius shudders. He cannot risk divine vengeance, and yet doing nothing feels just as dangerous. He imagines the child growing into a man, a sword in his hand, his own death in his eyes. The prophecy looms larger than the torchlight, filling every corner of the room. Historians still argue whether the Greeks genuinely believed in prophecy, or if they treated it more as a storytelling device, something inevitable to keep tales moving. Either way, for Acrisius, it is real as the beating of his heart. Down in the bronze chamber, Danaë rocks Perseus, her lullabies trembling with fear. She knows her father well enough to sense what comes next. Acrisius has never been a man of mercy. He may not dare to kill outright, but he will find a way to rid himself of the threat. She kisses her child's forehead, whispering promises she may not be able to keep. The next morning, Acrisius makes his decision. He orders a great wooden chest to be built, large enough to hold a woman and a child, sturdy enough to survive the tossing of waves. The craftsmen work in silence, hammering nails with the unease of men who suspect they are aiding in something cruel. A quirky little note from later traditions claims that one carpenter muttered a prayer to Poseidon under his breath, hoping the sea god might take pity on whoever was destined for this box. When it is finished, the chest gleams faintly with resin and iron bands. To anyone else, it looks like a storage trunk for treasure, but to Acrisius, it is his loophole, a way to avoid murder while still banishing fate. He convinces himself this is an act of necessity, not cruelty. If the gods want Danaë and Perseus to survive, they will save them. If not, then his problem will be solved by the waves. Danaë is seized without warning. Guards march into the chamber, their footsteps clanging on bronze. She clutches Perseus tightly, demanding to know where they are taking her. No one answers. She is dragged through the palace halls, past whispering servants and trembling attendants, out to the shore where the chest waits. Acrisius stands there, his crown glinting in the sun, his expression carved from stone. You hover above the scene as Danaë pleads with him. She swears she has done nothing wrong, that the gods chose her fate. She begs him to show mercy for the child's sake. But Acrisius only shakes his head. His voice trembles as he orders her into the chest. "If the gods protect you, you will live," he mutters, though it sounds less like hope and more like excuse. Danaë climbs in, cradling Perseus, her tears falling onto the wooden planks. The lid closes with a hollow thud, sealing her in darkness. The sound of hammering echoes as the chest is nailed shut, the finality ringing like a death knell. Then strong arms heave it toward the water. The chest splashes into the sea, bobbing uncertainly before the tide pulls it outward. The guards watch in silence, perhaps uneasy at the cruelty they've enacted. Acrisius turns away quickly, unwilling to watch, as though distance will erase guilt. He convinces himself that he has done the wise thing, that he has outmaneuvered prophecy. But you, floating just above the waves, know better. In these stories, destiny is patient. The sea will not swallow the child meant to shape legend. Here's an open debate for you. Scholars still argue whether Acrisius's decision represents cowardice, pragmatism, or a twisted form of faith. By sending Danaë and Perseus out to sea, he avoided direct bloodshed while still condemning them to probable death. Some say it shows the Greek tendency to respect divine will, leaving survival in the gods' hands. Others say it reveals the failure of human compassion, masked as piety. Either way, the outcome is the same. Mother and child adrift, destiny floating on the waves. The chest rocks farther from shore, swallowed by the horizon. Inside, Danaë clings to Perseus in the dark, whispering that they will endure, that the gods must have a plan. Acrisius, back in his palace, exhales with relief, convinced he has outwitted fate. But above, on Olympus, the gods exchange knowing glances. Zeus smirks faintly, Hera rolls her eyes, and somewhere in the shadows of prophecy, the threads of Perseus's destiny tighten. And you, drifting with the chest, begin to feel the rhythm of the sea, the slow rise and fall, the endless rocking. It's almost soothing, if you ignore the danger. You let the waves carry you, soft and relentless, until the line between fear and sleep blurs into the steady lull of the tide. You drift now with the chest itself, bobbing on the restless water as if you're one of its silent passengers. The wooden planks creak, swollen by the spray, but they hold. Salt water splashes over the lid, sliding down its sides like a cruel baptism. Inside, Danaë curls herself protectively around Perseus, her arms forming a shield against the darkness. The smell of damp wood and the sting of sea brine fill her senses, and though she can't see beyond the narrow seams, she knows they've been cast into the mercy or indifference of the sea. The chest isn't elegant, it's rough-hewn, quickly built, designed more for disposal than survival. But in Greek storytelling, the sea often acts less like an enemy and more like a stage for destiny. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect the Greeks' uneasy respect for the ocean, that vast expanse that could nourish with fish one day and swallow entire fleets the next. Acrisius, standing on his shore, counted on its cruelty. Danaë, in the dark, can only pray for its kindness. The child Perseus stirs, whimpering, and Danaë soothes him with words she doesn't even believe herself. That the gods are watching, that no harm will come, that even on the sea's endless back they are not alone. You can almost feel the rocking of the chest beneath you, as if the waves are giant hands lulling mother and child into uneasy sleep. Above, gulls wheel and cry. Their voices pierce the air, mocking or warning, it's hard to tell which. A quirky detail from ancient seafaring is that sailors often read gulls as omens. Their cries could foretell storms or safe harbour, depending on the storyteller. If Danaë could hear the gulls clearly, perhaps she would have searched their calls for a hint of hope. But in the sealed dark she has only her son's shallow breaths to guide her. Night falls, and the chest drifts farther. Stars glitter faintly overhead, though Danaë cannot see them. You, however, can. The constellations stretch across the sky like silver nets, each one tied to some myth or other. Heroes, monsters, gods. Perhaps someday Perseus himself will join them, his name immortalized in starlight. For now, though, he is just a baby asleep in his mother's arms, his tiny fist curled as if grasping the thread of fate itself. Back in Argos, Acrisius sleeps uneasily. He tells himself he has solved the problem, but dreams come to him of the sea refusing his offering, of the chest returning, of prophecy laughing in his face. He wakes drenched in sweat, yet reassures himself that distance means safety. He will learn, as many kings did in myth, that fate has a habit of circling back, no matter how far you cast it away. The waves toss the chest, rocking it side to side. Danaë whispers prayers into the dark, some to Zeus, others to Poseidon, some to nameless powers she hopes might pity her. Did the gods hear her? Scholars still debate whether the Greeks believed in the personal prayers of individuals, or whether these myths simply dramatized the tension between mortal desperation and divine indifference. Still, in that chest, her whispers are no less real for being uncertain. The chest is both coffin and cradle, both prison and ark. You think of other tales, Noah's Ark carrying life through flood, or the box that saved baby Moses on the Nile. Myths across cultures seem to share this motif. A vulnerable child adrift on water, protected by nothing but chance and divine favour. Maybe the sea, as terrifying as it is, has always been the perfect symbol for destiny. Vast, unpredictable, impossible to fight. Inside, Perseus dreams. He is too young to know it, but the sea cradles him the way his mother does, rocking him toward a future filled with monsters and glory. Danaë, meanwhile, stays awake, every sound amplified, the slap of waves, the groan of wood, the hiss of wind. Her astonishment of earlier days has transformed into grim determination. She no longer wonders if the gods chose her. She only hopes they won't abandon her, and you, floating alongside the chest, feel the rhythm of the sea seep into your bones. The rocking is endless, hypnotic, like a lullaby hummed by the tide itself. Every rise and fall is a reminder that survival sometimes depends on surrendering to forces larger than yourself. The chest is carried farther into the horizon, out of sight of Argos, out of reach of Acrisius, and closer to whatever story waits on the other shore. The chest drifts onward, carried by currents that seem both random and purposeful, as though the sea itself knows it's carrying more than wood and nails. You float along with it, rocking to the rhythm of the waves. Sometimes the sea is gentle, barely nudging the box along as if it were a toy. Other times it hurls the chest upward on foaming crests, before dropping it into troughs so deep that Danaë holds her breath, praying it won't capsize. Inside, the darkness is absolute. Danaë cannot see the sky, cannot guess the hour. All she knows is the motion, the endless tossing that keeps her stomach clenched. She clings to Perseus, who cries when the chest rocks too sharply, then drifts back into sleep when the motion evens out. Her arms ache, her throat is raw from whispering soothing words, but she does not let go. If this wooden prison is to be their coffin, she has decided they will at least be together in it. The sea itself feels alive tonight. Winds howl across the surface, rattling the chest like dice in a gambler's hand. To ancient Greeks, storms were never just weather. They were moods of the gods, signs of their shifting tempers. Historians still argue whether myths like this reflected real sailors' experiences with the Mediterranean's sudden tempests, or if storytellers simply use storms as convenient metaphors for fate's unpredictability. Either way, Danaë is caught in the middle of one now. Lightning flashes somewhere in the distance. Danaë can't see it, but you can. For a moment the waves look like mountains made of black glass, their peaks tipped with white foam. The chest bobs between them like a cork, vanishing into valleys only to rise again dripping and trembling. The thunder follows, rolling deep, a sound that feels less like noise and more like a reminder. The gods are still watching. Through it all, Danaë prays. She prays to Zeus, though she's not sure if he listens. She prays to Poseidon, master of the sea. She prays even to Thetis, a sea nymph, hoping some gentle hand might guide them through. Her prayers are not eloquent. They are broken, repetitive, desperate. But desperation, in myth, has its own power. And then, as storms do, this one passes. The winds calm, the waves soften, and the chest drifts into eerie quiet. No gulls cry overhead, no wind stirs, only the slow slap of water against wood, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. Danaë exhales, pressing her cheek to Perseus's head. She dares to believe that maybe, just maybe, survival is possible. Let's pause for a quirky detail. Some ancient poets described Perseus's chest as being guided by dolphins. Imagine that, sleek, playful shapes swimming alongside, nudging the box gently when it strays too far. Dolphins were sacred to Apollo, symbols of guidance and rescue. Whether literal or poetic, the image adds a softness to the myth. Not just a mother and child against the waves, but companions unseen, helping them reach safety. Back in Argos, Acrisius convinces himself he's free of danger. He feasts, he speaks to his people with new confidence, he tells himself the prophecy is broken. Yet in his dreams, the sound of waves fills his ears, and he sees a wooden chest floating endlessly, never sinking. He wakes at dawn uneasy, though he tries to laugh it off. Scholars still argue whether myths like this served as warnings to rulers that paranoia only delays fate rather than prevents it. Acrisius, however, doesn't care about philosophy. He only cares about sleeping at night. Meanwhile, Danaë loses track of time. One day blends into the next. Her only mark is the rhythm of Perseus's cries and the sway of the sea. Sometimes she feels they've been drifting for weeks. Other times, only hours. Hunger gnaws at her. Thirst burns. But she sings anyway, her voice hoarse but steady, filling the chest with lullabies. In a strange way, the tossing has become part of the song, each crash of wave another note in her desperate melody. You, floating outside, notice something she cannot. Far on the horizon, faint shapes rise from the water, land waiting in the distance. The chest is no longer drifting aimlessly. It is being pulled, slowly but surely, towards shore. The sea has tested them with fury, then granted them calm. Now it seems ready to deliver them to the next stage of their story. The waves grow gentler, almost rocking them intentionally like a cradle. Danaë doesn't know it yet, but her astonishment and dread will soon shift into relief. The tossing of the waves, which once threatened to undo her, will soon carry her into safety. And Perseus, still sleeping in her arms, will open his eyes for the first time not to bronze walls or pitch darkness, but to the wide open sky of a new home. And you, rocking along with them, feel your own breath slowing, as though the sea has wrapped you too in its cradle. Every crash softens, every movement steadies, until the rhythm becomes less like danger and more like a lullaby. The chest, the waves, the horizon, they all blur into one long sway, pulling you deeper into calm. At last, dawn breaks across the horizon, washing the sea in pale rose and silver light. The chest drifts steadily now, guided by a current that feels deliberate, as though some unseen hand has steered it toward a destination. You hover above the water, watching as the chest bumps against foam-tipped waves, edges softened by time but still holding strong. It has endured storms, hunger, darkness, yet it has not splintered. It was built to discard, but fate has repurposed it into a vessel of survival. The cries of gulls pierce the quiet, closer now, sharper. Danaë stirs, blinking in the dimness, sensing something different in the air. The rocking has shifted, less wild, more controlled. She whispers to Perseus, telling him that maybe, just maybe, the gods have heard them. Then comes a jolt, soft but firm, as the chest grinds against something solid. Shore. The chest lodges itself in the sand of Seriphos, a small island that, in myth and in history, rarely takes the spotlight. You can almost see it now. Rugged coastline, sparse trees leaning against the salty wind, fishermen hauling nets as the first light stretches across the sea. It is quiet, unassuming, yet it is about to become the stage for destiny. A quirky, historical fact. Seriphos was considered a poor, barren island in ancient times, famous less for its wealth than for its rocky resilience. It makes sense, then, that Perseus's journey of hardship and triumph would begin here, not in some glittering palace, but on a modest shore. The chest rocks once more before tipping on its side. The lid, swollen from days of salt water, loosens under the pressure. Slowly it creaks open. Danaë pushes upward, blinking against the sudden flood of daylight. She breathes in the sharp scent of salt and seaweed, air fresher than anything she has known since her imprisonment. For the first time in what feels like years, she sees the sky, not as a strip of light above bronze walls, not as a faint glow through cracks, but as a vast canvas stretching endlessly overhead. She steps onto the sand, legs trembling, Perseus cradled against her chest. Her gown clings damply, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with both exhaustion and wonder. The island seems deserted, but she knows better than to trust silence. She calls out faintly, her voice raw. The only answer is the crash of waves behind her and the distant cry of seabirds. But Seriphos is not empty. Fishermen, pulling in their nets nearby, spot the strange sight. A chest washed ashore, a woman stepping from it like a vision, a child in her arms. They drop their nets and hurry closer, wary but curious. To them, it looks less like disaster and more like omen. In ancient Greece, the sea delivering people to your shore was always suspicious, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. Historians still argue whether communities like this genuinely welcomed castaways, or saw them as dangerous burdens. In this case, though, Danaë and Perseus are met with cautious compassion. The fishermen whisper among themselves, crossing themselves for luck, debating whether she's a nymph, a goddess, or just a mortal thrown to their care. Danaë kneels in the sand, clutching Perseus, too weary to resist. She lets the island men approach, their hands rough from nets and salt, their eyes wary but softened by the sight of the baby. One kneels, murmuring a prayer to Poseidon, as though thanking the sea for delivering them not fish but a story. They carry Danaë and Perseus inland, past jagged rocks and shallow pools teeming with crabs. The village of Seriphos is humble, low stone huts, smoke rising from cooking fires, the smell of fish drying in the sun. Children stop playing to gape at the strangers, while women peer from doorways whispering. Danaë feels all eyes on her, but for once those eyes are not suspicious. They're curious, even kind. Among the villagers is Dictys, a fisherman of gentle spirit, brother to the island's king Polydectes. He is the one who truly takes pity, offering Danaë and Perseus shelter, food, a life away from the cruelty of Acrisius. Dictys' name, meaning net, feels symbolic now, as though his role is to catch those who would otherwise drown. You can almost picture him guiding them into his simple home, offering warmth without questions, his kindness a balm against Danaë's fear. A quirky tidbit. In some retellings, Dictys finds the chest himself while fishing, tugging it up with his net like an unexpected catch. This variation paints him less as a bystander and more as the rescuer chosen by fate. Either way, Danaë and Perseus end up in his care, their lives now intertwined with the humble rhythms of Seriphos. And you, watching from the shoreline, feel the relief settle in. The sea has released its hold, the tossing waves are behind them, the prophecy is not undone, but for now, mother and child have safety. Acrisius may still haunt the distance, but here on this quiet island, destiny pauses to catch its breath. You let yourself sink into that quiet too, the sound of the surf smoothing into background hum. The cries of gulls fade, the smell of salt softens, and the image of Danaë stepping into sunlight lingers like the first moment of calm after a long storm. Danaë and Perseus settle into life on Seriphos, the humble island becoming both refuge and new beginning. The days here are not gilded with wealth or splendour. Instead, they are painted with the smell of salt fish drying in the sun, the rough touch of nets being mended, and the laughter of children chasing each other across sandy paths. You drift through the village, noticing how modest it is compared to Argos. No bronze towers, no oracles in marble halls, just stone huts, worn sandals, and the steady rhythm of waves against rock. Dictys, the fisherman who first offered kindness, becomes their protector. His hut is small but warm, filled with the smells of seaweed and wood smoke. Danaë, still shaken by her father's betrayal, clings to Perseus, pouring her energy into raising him. The villagers whisper about them, of course. Strange arrivals always spark curiosity. Some say Danaë must be a goddess in disguise, cast down to live among mortals. Others insist she carries the favour of Zeus himself, pointing to the child's bright eyes as proof. Historians still argue whether myths like these were a way of explaining why certain heroes were set apart from ordinary mortals. By giving them divine ancestry, storytellers made their greatness inevitable. Danaë adapts slowly. She learns to grind grain with the women of the village, though her hands blister at first. She helps mend nets with Dictys, though the rough twine leaves red marks on her fingers. Perseus grows quickly, toddling through the sand, laughing at crabs scuttling sideways. His curls glint in the sun, and villagers murmur that he looks less like a fisherman's boy and more like something shaped from starlight. One quirky note: ancient Seriphos was said to be barren and rocky, so poor that it became a metaphor for insignificance. The comic poets often mocked it as the place where nothing important happened. And yet, here in this unimportant place, one of Greece's greatest heroes spends his childhood. It's a reminder that myths love irony. The small, overlooked places often become the cradles of destiny. Danaë, though safer than before, still carries fear. At night, when Perseus sleeps, she stares at the ceiling and wonders if Acrisius will come hunting. She knows the sea did not drown her, meaning the gods have spared her. But what will that mean? Will they protect her forever? Or have they only saved her so she can fulfill the prophecy that terrifies her father? Scholars still argue whether Danaë was portrayed as victim or survivor, depending on the storyteller. To some, she was a pawn of divine games. To others, she embodied resilience in the face of impossible odds. And Perseus, he grows strong. He learns the rhythms of island life, how to fish, how to run barefoot across jagged stones, how to laugh when salt water stings his eyes. The villagers begin to treat him with the kind of awe usually reserved for omens. Children follow him, imitating his every move, while elders shake their heads, muttering that no ordinary boy can shine like that. Danaë watches with both pride and dread. She knows the oracle's words. Her son is destined to kill his grandfather. She loves him fiercely, but every smile reminds her of fate's shadow. It is the cruel paradox of Greek myth, that love and doom often share the same cradle. You drift through the village as the seasons turn, listening to the rhythm of this new life. Fishermen sing as they mend nets, women gossip while grinding grain, children chase Perseus through the waves. The prophecy feels distant here, softened by the daily grind of survival. Yet it lingers, like a storm cloud far off on the horizon, and you, lulled by the quiet hum of this island, can almost feel why bedtime myths stretch so long. Life here is not dramatic. It's slow, repetitive, sleepy in its own way. The waves keep coming, nets keep tearing, children keep laughing, but beneath that rhythm destiny waits, patient and unrelenting. Time passes, and Perseus grows from a laughing child into a youth with sharp eyes and strong limbs, the kind of boy who seems to carry the sea's vigour in his blood. You walk with him along the stony coastlines of Seriphos, where his feet grip the rocks as if they were made for them. He helps Dictys with fishing, hauling nets heavy with silver-scaled catches, his back straight and uncomplaining. The villagers watch him and whisper, "This boy is no ordinary islander's son." His mother Danaë tells him stories by the fire each night, but she keeps silent about the golden reign that began his life. But not everyone on Seriphos greets Perseus with kindness. The island has a king, Polydectes, brother of Dictys, whose gaze lingers on Danaë longer than it should. Polydectes is not cruel in the theatrical sense. He does not storm through the village with whips or thunder, but his desire is persistent, and persistence in Greek myth is often more dangerous than open malice. He sees Danaë not only as beautiful, but as a prize. She is mysterious, regal even in exile, her dignity shining brighter than the rough cottages around her. He convinces himself he deserves her, though Danaë has made clear her refusal. You watch her shrink from his gaze at feasts, keeping her eyes lowered, holding Perseus close even as he grows older. Polydectes interprets her resistance as a challenge, the kind that inflames kings rather than deters them, and here lies the seed of the trouble that will later propel Perseus into legend. Historians still argue whether these stories of predatory kings reflected real anxieties about the vulnerability of women in patriarchal societies, or if they were simply dramatic engines to push heroes into their quests. Either way, Polydectes' gaze sets the stage. Dictys does what he can to shield them, but even he cannot counter the will of his royal brother. Polydectes smiles too often, asks too many questions, sends too many gifts of food and wine to Danaë's hut. The villagers whisper again, not with kindness this time, but with suspicion. What will happen if their king grows frustrated? Seriphos may be small, but power is power, and Polydectes holds it. Perseus notices. He's not a child anymore. He sees the way his mother stiffens when the king approaches, hears the tension in her voice after Polydectes leaves. He feels anger rise within him, a fire that Danaë tries to soothe. She reminds him not to speak rashly, not to provoke. But Perseus is young, proud, and unaware that his defiance will one day be woven into legend. One quirky note from tradition. Polydectes supposedly admired horses more than anything, and in some versions of the myth, he pretends he wants to marry Danaë only as a ploy to force Perseus into a dangerous quest. Imagine that. A king disguising his obsession under the thin excuse of wanting fine horses as gifts. It's almost comical, though the danger it creates is very real. For now, though, the tension simmers quietly. Danaë goes about her days, weaving cloth, singing softly as Perseus sharpens knives or practices with stones. The boy who once toddled after crabs now hurls rocks with uncanny precision. Villagers cheer him on, joking that even giants would have headaches after a blow from his hand. Danaë smiles, but inside she feels the tightening of prophecy. Each step Perseus takes toward manhood is a step closer to the fate she dreads. Polydectes bides his time. He flatters Danaë when they meet, lingers in her presence, pretends to be benevolent, but his patience is not kindness, it is strategy. The king knows he must rid himself of Perseus if he wants Danaë without obstacle. Already you can sense the trap forming, threads pulling together for the great test that will send Perseus across the world. And you, watching all this unfold, can't help but feel the uneasy stillness before a storm. The humble rhythms of Seriphos, nets drying in the sun, gulls crying overhead, waves slapping the shore, begin to sound less like peace and more like a ticking clock. Scholars still argue whether Polydectes was portrayed as a true villain or simply a narrative device, a kind of necessary irritant to push Perseus into action. Either way, his presence looms now, casting a shadow over the quiet island life. And Danaë? She sits in the doorway of Dictys' hut at night, gazing at Perseus as he sleeps, and she prays silently. She prays he will stay safe, that his father Zeus will remember him, that the prophecy will not unfold as cruelly as it was foretold. But the gods, as you know by now, are rarely in the business of answering prayers the way mortals hope. The island darkens into quiet, and you feel the weight of unease pressing down as Polydectes sharpens his schemes. The days of peace for Danaë and Perseus are dwindling, and destiny is stretching its hand once more. The whispers spread quietly through Seriphos, stories of Danaë, of her miraculous child, of the strange golden rain that began it all. Around fires at night, villagers trade versions of the tale, each retelling embroidered with details more dazzling or more absurd than the last. Some say Zeus himself still visits in secret, disguised as a beam of moonlight slipping through a roof. Others claim Perseus shines faintly in the dark, proof of divine parentage. Danaë, hearing such talk, only holds her son tighter, wishing she could silence the rumours. But stories have wings. Perseus, now nearly grown, hears them too. He does not yet understand the weight of prophecy, though he feels destiny humming in his veins like a string pulled taut. He is quicker than other boys, stronger, braver, sometimes reckless. He wrestles with friends on the sand, swims farther out than the fishermen dare, lifts stones twice his size for practice. The villagers cheer, but Danaë watches with both pride and dread. Every triumph of his reminds her that he is not an ordinary youth, and that fate is circling closer. Here's a curious historical note. Ancient Greek heroes were often tied to divine paternity, not simply to glorify them, but to explain their extraordinary feats in a world without modern science. How else could a man slay Medusa or tame winged horses, except by claiming Zeus as his father? Yet at the same time, myths preserved unease about such births. Was divine parentage a gift or a curse? Scholars still argue whether Perseus' story was meant to celebrate Zeus's power, or quietly critique the chaos it brought to mortal lives. On Seriphos, the unease sharpens. Polydectes, the king, cannot ignore Danaë's beauty, or Perseus' growing strength. He begins to weave his plan more openly. He tells the court he wishes to marry, but conveniently never mentions the woman's name. He calls for gifts, demands loyalty, and hints that Perseus, with all his youthful vigour, should be capable of bringing him something extraordinary. Behind this theatre lies the king's true aim: rid himself of the boy who shields Danaë. Danaë senses the danger long before it arrives. She begs Perseus to keep his head low, to obey the king, to stay out of sight. But Perseus, like any youth raised on pride and half-heard rumours of divine blood, cannot help himself. He walks boldly into the agora. He spars with men twice his age. He answers Polydectes' thinly veiled threats with defiance. You can almost hear the ticking in the background, each boast another click on the clock of destiny. And still, the whispers grow. Villagers mutter that Perseus is destined for greatness, that he will slay monsters, that he will bring glory to Seriphos. Others murmur darker things, that wherever Zeus plants his seed, ruin follows, that Acrisius' curse may still chase them across the sea. Stories change with every mouth, but their effect is the same. They paint Perseus as someone marked by fate. Danaë cannot stop the stories any more than she could stop the tide. She lies awake at night, staring into the shadows of Dictys' hut, wondering if every whispered rumour is another step toward the prophecy's fulfilment. She prays to Zeus, but she knows better than to expect an answer. Gods rarely linger after they've set mortals spinning on the wheel of destiny. Here's a quirky note. Later poets loved to describe Perseus as having a certain glow about him, a kind of hero's aura. Whether or not that was meant literally, you can imagine the island children trailing after him like moths to a lantern, while elders shook their heads knowingly. Even without realizing it, Perseus has become a living myth in the eyes of Seriphos. And you, drifting through these slow island days, feel the tension coil. It's the calm before the storm, the hushed breath before the shout. Perseus's life is still tied to fishing nets and rocky shores, but destiny is restless. Polydectes watches, Danaë worries, villagers whisper, and the gods above glance at one another with knowing smirks. The story that began with a golden rain now hovers on the edge of something greater, a hero's journey. But for tonight, you sit with the whispers, letting them murmur like waves in the background, their repetition soothing even as they carry the weight of inevitability. The island is quiet at dusk, the waves lapping softly against the rocky shore, the fires burning low in the fishermen's huts. You linger in the glow of those fires, listening to the murmured retellings of Danaë's story, which has by now become part of Seriphos's fabric. The villagers pass it along like a familiar lullaby, the locked-away princess, the shower of gold, the chest at sea, and the miraculous arrival on their barren island. Each time it's told, the details shift. Sometimes Danaë is radiant as a goddess, sometimes Perseus glows like a star, but the heart of it remains the same. Fate finds its way, no matter the walls or waves. Perseus, now on the cusp of manhood, listens to these tales with a mixture of pride and confusion. He doesn't yet understand the prophecy, or why his mother grows so tense at the mention of Argos, or why she clutches his arm so tightly when Polydectes looks at him for too long. He only knows that he feels larger than this island, as though the sea itself is calling him outward. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect the ancient belief that heroes were destined from birth, or whether they were stories told backward, great deeds explained after the fact by divine ancestry. But to Perseus, the whispers feel less like history, and more like the stirring of destiny inside his chest. Polydectes sharpens his schemes, waiting for the right moment to rid himself of the boy and claim Danaë. Danaë prays in silence, her heart divided between fierce love and looming fear. And you, drifting at the edge of their story, know what they do not, that prophecy does not sleep, and the tale of golden rain was never meant to end in quiet exile. The scholars who later wrote about this myth puzzled over its symbolism. Was the golden shower really Zeus's way of sneaking into Danaë's chamber, or was it a poetic metaphor for divine blessing, wealth, fertility, unstoppable fate? Some whispered that the story was never about Danaë at all, but about how destiny slips through any wall no matter how strong. Others wondered if the Greeks simply enjoyed a dramatic image, not worried about logic, but about wonder. Historians still argue whether this myth was sacred allegory or cheeky entertainment, but its endurance suggests it struck a balance of both, and so the story lingers, not as a neat conclusion, but as an open thread. Acrisius, far away in Argos, believes he has escaped his doom. Danaë, on Seriphos, knows better. Perseus, stretching into youth, is restless, ready for a world that will test him in ways he cannot imagine. And you, nestled in the folds of this myth, let your thoughts drift as the story softens, no longer pressing forward but dissolving into a haze of timelessness. The fire dies low, the voices of the villagers grow faint, the waves hush themselves as if lulling you to sleep. The tale of Zeus's disguise has run its course, not to its end, but to its resting place for tonight. Now the story eases back, like the tide retreating from the shore. You feel the edges blur, the bronze walls, the glitter of golden rain, the rocking of the chest at sea, softening into background shadows. The noise of gods and kings grows quiet, their squabbles dimming as though Olympus itself has decided to whisper. What remains is the gentle rhythm of waves, rising and falling like your own breath. You picture Danaë holding Perseus, rocking him in the hush of the island night. Her voice is low, her lullabies slow, each note stretching longer, softer, until even she is drifting. The fire beside her flickers lazily, painting gold on the walls just faintly, like a memory of Zeus's shimmering descent. You realise the story was never really about thunder or prophecy, but about how even in fear and exile, quiet moments of survival can glow. Let your own breathing follow that rhythm. Inhale like the tide pulling in, exhale like the tide slipping back. The storm has passed, the chest has found shore, the whispers have faded into silence. The weight of prophecy is no longer yours to carry. You need only the calm that remains. The stars above Seriphos hang steady, their light not dazzling but gentle, the kind of glow that never asks anything of you. You watch them until they blur, until the shapes dissolve, until your eyelids grow heavier than bronze. And so the myth drifts into stillness. Danaë and Perseus rest. Acrisius waits unknowingly. The gods retreat to their clouds, and you, softly without effort, slip into your own quiet dream. Sweet dreams.